All right, now today we'll go ahead and start with pyramids. So, whenever you talk about Egypt, that's usually the first thing that comes to mind, is all of the pyramids that are there. But the pyramid building, you know, wasn't something that happened just instantaneously. It was something that they gradually worked up to, and it had a lot to do with their religion and their beliefs in the afterlife. So, if you remember, we said that a lot of the ground in Egypt is desert, very sandy, very rocky. In that sand, there's a lot of different salts and natrons. And back then, when people passed away, they buried them in the ground. Unlike we do today, where we have different vaults and things that we do to bury people. Initially, back then, they would just bury people out in the desert. Well, obviously with sand, it doesn't really stay in one place very well. And it will blow and drift and all that kind of stuff. So, they noticed that over time, after this sand had blown away and started to drift, it would uncover the bodies that they had buried. And when it did that, it was very common for them to notice that the people that were buried hadn't decomposed at all. The natural salts and the natrons and things that were in the sand had kept the bodies preserved. So people were kind of shocked by this at first, but eventually they started thinking that that body must not have decomposed because the person's spirit must still be using it, or it must still be needed after their death. So it created this whole thought or belief in the afterlife. And what they started to do is when they would bury people in the desert and in the sand, they started to cover their bodies with stone blocks that they called a mastaba. So they would bury the body and put this stone block over top of it, and that would keep the sand from blowing away or drifting away. It would help keep the body covered. Well, over time, the people who could afford it, or the people that were wealthy, they'd have their stone mastabas, and to show their importance or their wealth, they would build them up a little bit higher. And eventually, as time went on and more people built these mastabas and wanted to show more of their importance, they continued to get higher and higher. As far as the shape goes, and that's a pretty simple shape. If you played with Legos, or I know you guys have never played with a wooden block in your life, but if you are trying to build a tower or something out of those, you usually start with that pyramid or that step pyramid shape. So that's kind of where that structure came from at first. So what you're seeing here, this is one of the giant examples of a mastaba. It's not really a pyramid, but you can see the different levels and stairs that it's composed of. So eventually what's going to happen is these mastabas are going to morph into what we know as pyramids. But the pyramids are only going to be built for the wealthiest, most powerful Egyptians, which are the pharaohs. And we'll talk about the pharaohs later on. Now, a couple of the ones I'm going to show you here, they're the first attempts at pyramids. This was, you can kind of see the inner core of it here. But this is initially what it looked like, the mastaba. And all this rubble that's at the base, they were trying to smooth it out and make it into a nice, smooth-sided pyramid. Well, obviously, over time, it didn't work out, and that's what all that rubble is here. Because it was so steep, it slid down and fell off. This pyramid, you'll often see it referred to as the bent pyramid, because as you go about a third of the way up, you're going to see about right here the angle of the pyramid changes. So they started constructing this one, got about a third of the way up and realized that the angle that they had it at was too steep. If they had kept that same angle going all the way up, it would have been much, much, much higher than they anticipated. And again, they probably would have collapsed on itself, or the sides would have slid down. Now, the pyramids that the Egyptians were going to build for their pharaohs, they were meant to be like a house for the afterlife. But most of the pyramids have the same features, depending on their size. All pyramids had 4 sides, in either a square or a rectangular base. But some things to kind of keep in mind as we go through the slides here and see the different pyramids. Remember that they didn't have any cutting tools. Anything that was cut or shaped here, it's going to be done by hand, with a hammer and a chisel pretty much. So this is a guy standing on the edge of what we call the Great Pyramid. And what I want you to kind of see here is the size of the blocks. Blocks are really pretty big. The weight of the individual blocks can be anywhere from 2,000 to 10,000 pounds. Obviously, some of them are, about the size of a small car. But with the Great Pyramid, I don't know if you read the stat on the last slide. There's about 92 million cubic feet of stone in the Great Pyramid. To kind of give you an idea of how much that is, if you've ever been to a big football stadium, so like the Horseshoe where Ohio State plays their football games, or if you've ever been to a Browns game or a Steelers or a Bengals game, that's enough stone to fill one of those stadiums. So there's a ton of stone in them. Now, to kind of give you an idea of the size of the Great Pyramid, this is an overhead map of our school. Everything that is colored in blue here, it's about 13 acres of land. That is the area of the Great Pyramid. Okay, so if you were to pick up the Great Pyramid and place it here on our campus, that's the amount of space that it would take up. Okay, so it's a very large structure. It's even, I think it looks small in some of these pictures that you're about to see. Just kind of remember it is much, much bigger than that. Its height was about 480 feet when it was first built. I would say our building is probably 75 to 100 feet high. So it's about 4 of our buildings stuck on top of each other. That's right. So, with your pyramids, like I said, there's a lot of stone involved. With this one here, you're going to see this kind of weird little edge on the top of it. This pyramid still has its casing stones, meaning that when the pyramid was finished, there was a layer of limestone that made up the sides that was smooth. So over time, that limestone has been taken away. It's fallen off, except for this one, it's still there at the top. Now, these pyramids are in a city called Giza. But again, look at the buildings here. These are pretty tall office buildings and apartment buildings. And these pyramids are pretty far away from these buildings. So, I mean, they are much, much larger than some of these pictures make them out to be. Now, with this one here, it looks like this is the opening of the pyramid. It is not. This is the remains of one of the temples that was built around the pyramids. Just kind of an optical illusion the way this picture is taken. Now, this structure here, it's a building called the Sphinx, but it's made with the has the face of a man and the body of a lion. But it sits right out in front of the pyramids of Giza. Now, it didn't always look like this. For a long time, a lot of it was buried under sand. So, I mean, you can kind of see, back in the 1920s is when they started to excavate this, which means they started to dig out the sand from around it. But that's what it looked like at one point. And remember, that's it today. Carter, was that you? Yeah, so no, the nose had fallen off over time. And it had a little headdress here too that has also fallen off. You see where part of the ear has come off too. I mean, it's 4,000 years old, so obviously over time it's deteriorated. Off the top of my head, I don't know. I'll have to look that one up. All right, so what you're seeing in this picture, there's several pyramids here. The one in the far back, that's actually the Great Pyramid. It's the biggest of these three main ones. It doesn't look like it in this picture just because it sits on lower ground, but it's also sitting further away. But if you look closely, you can kind of see, again, this is that pyramid that we saw the closer up shot of that has that outer layer still intact. But this Great Pyramid back here, that belonged to Khufu. This was his son's pyramid. This was his grandson's pyramid. These smaller ones, these are really just those mastabas that I was telling you about. Those are sometimes called Queen's pyramids. So this is the satellite image of those pyramids of Giza. Here's your Great Pyramid here. The picture we just saw was taken in this area over here because you can see the three small Queen's pyramids. And if you look really closely right there, there's our Sphinx. So in that picture, the Sphinx looked, a lot bigger compared to the pyramids, but it's really, really tiny compared to them. All the different stuff that you're seeing on the outside here, these are little mastabas, because that's part of a cemetery. Same thing on that side. And this shows you the different temples and things that were built outside of it as well. Alright, so we're going to look at that Great Pyramid for a bit in particular. This diagram shows you, like, if we were to cut it in half, this is what the inside would look like. And again, I'm going to show you the actual inside in a second. But it gives you the heights of it. Like we said before, it was 480 when it was first built. Today it's 450. Couple reasons for that. For one, it's missing that outer layer of stone. Weathering and erosion has taken some of its height away, and the pure weight of it sinking into the ground has taken some of that height away. The chambers and passageways that you see here, those are really the only open areas. Everything else is solid stone inside of it. Yes. So here's the entrance, or one of the pathways to the entrance. And there's that actual entrance. Now, a couple things I want you to look at here and keep in mind when we look at the inside. Okay, look how well those stones fit together. Look how sharply they're cut and look how smooth they are. Remember, they didn't have any, power tools. Everything was done by hand. So it was chiseled that way. Here's that grand gallery. So again, you've got your smooth walls, but if you look closely, you'll see where each stone, they just set in a couple more inches from the one in front of it in order to make that passageway. Now, today, there's a lot of these like wooden footholds so that people can walk in there. those were not originally there when it was first built.